Welcome boys and girls, Costin here with a discussion about the Tomb Kings and the key issues for the Tomb Kings at the moment in Warhammer 3 that hopefully Creative Assembly will be resolving when they do update the Tomb Kings and the Lizardmen as they've promised in their most recent blog. I mean, there was actually quite a lot of information in that blog. Now, to be certain, there are many things that CA can do for the Tomb Kings, some easier than others. So let's consider one of the issues that the Tomb Kings do have. Their limited army capacity. It takes 14 turns of research to increase their army capacity. There are of course other ways of increasing it through Canopic jars. We'll get into that in just a moment. But the reality is spending 14 turns to just get a second army, especially in a campaign like Cetra, for instance, given his starting situation, is something that's going to limit your campaign by quite a bit. It means that the early game is pretty annoying, and then you just steamroll everything because you're obliterating anyone that stands in your way with free armies, free heroes, immortal lords for leading those armies, so you really don't care about the forces. Of course, this is also tied to the problem of the unit cap, so at the beginning of the campaign you do have the severe limitation on what kind of units you can recruit, but then later on you're just walking over everyone else that stands in your path because, well, quite frankly, no one is going to be able to stop you once you get enough unit caps, once you get enough armies, once you get enough heroes. So that is something that Creative Assembly should change. Maybe just starting Tomb Kings with an extra army, maybe improving the research speed over here for these kind of dynasties, and maybe changing Canopic jars, because that is another issue as well. See, the only way you can gain Canopic jars, or the only ways you can gain Canopic jars, is you fight the battle, and then you have this post-battle option of Harvest Tokens. But here's the problem with this particular option. It is a flat value, so whenever you take a settlement, you can gain Canopic jars, but again, flat value. Whenever you fight a battle, you can get a flat value of Canopic jars. Compare that to, say, Cast Dwarves or Dark Elves with their slaves, who also rely on that post-battle situation. They do have that, they do have scalability in terms of how many captives they get post-battle in a way that Tomb Kings don't. And it's not like you need a few Canopic jars. Getting an extra army capacity is 800. Getting hero capacity is 400, and that's just the start of it, beyond the fact that you do need multiple resources. And don't even get me started with the mortuary cult crafting items, because you're never really going to be in a position as the Tomb Kings to increase, to get items over here, because, well, flat out, you just need it, or it's far more beneficial to get some Necrotech capacity, Lich Priest capacity, Tomb Prince capacity, or Army capacity in your campaign, saving a lot of your Canopic jars. So that's one of the things that I do believe that Creative Assembly should change for the Tomb Kings. The second thing that they should also change is also related to research. And not just like, army capacity. No, there's all kinds of things. The principal way you actually gain hero capacity early on in a campaign as Tomb Kings is through research. So you're spending money or you're spending Canopic jars in order to increase hero capacity. It's much cheaper to do it for the research tree, but yeah, it's just not really a great dynamic to be dealing with that. Then, on top of that, we do have the victory conditions for the Tomb King, specifically the long campaign victory condition, which requires you to take pretty much every settlement in Nehekara and then build up those pyramids. So that means any ally, any kind of faction that you might have good relations with, including other Tomb Kings, you're not going to be able to do that because you need to get these pyramids. I mean, to be fair, you probably would want those pyramids anyway because they do give you some pretty sizable bonuses when you get a lot of these. But still, it is something that does limit you in quite a few ways in your campaign when you're considering that situation. So victory conditions are a problem, especially when you're playing someone like Katep, who starts way over here, and he has to make his way all the way back to Khemri, and then he has to fight anyone that is in Khemri to take that land and resettle it, and get those elements to tier 3, build those pyramids. And this means Katep, who lore-wise is a faithful ally of Cetra, ends up having to fight Cetra in order to win his campaign. Like, I think the victory conditions only make sense from the perspective of playing an Archon campaign, which incidentally is why one of the reasons Archon is the best Tomb King campaign in the game. Because his victory conditions are far more sensical. He starts with an extra army capacity from the beginning of his campaign. He just has a much better time overall. He also has a much easier starting position to be dealing with. But he doesn't have the early game issues, but that just means he's steamrolling from turn 1 as opposed to steamrolling from turn 20 plus, which is the case in other Tomb King campaigns. And look, it's not a fun experience to have a campaign where you just either have a miserable start, or in the case of Archon you don't, but then you're just obliterating everyone in your path after that. I mean, there's some other things to also take into consideration in regards to Tomb Kings, like victory conditions. But then we have the Books of Nagash. I personally detested Books of Nagash for a couple of reasons. And I think that while this is not a system you have to deal with, is kind of one of their main campaign mechanics. And it just doesn't really work all that well. Let me explain why. So first off, the position of the books is always going to be static, but the effects of the books, not so much. So, and some books are just flat out better than others, especially early on in a campaign. So for instance, the 5th book of Nagash is flat out better than any other book that you can get, with the exception of the 1st book of Nagash. In fact, in this case, like, the randomization here is actually pretty okay. It's not the best. It would be better if these books were swapped. So if you had the 5th book of Nagash in Lamia and then a rogue army, because that rogue army can be pretty difficult. But yeah, being able to get 1 hero capacity to all heroes, and then 5 unit capacity for Tomb Guard and Tomb Guard with Halberd, which are separate units, so you're getting 10 units over there, plus an army capacity is pretty substantial, as opposed to 10 research rate, 10 Canopic jars, Lord Recruit rank. I mean, there's some useful things, but yeah, no one's gonna go out of their way to get 20% income from trade tariffs. Oh, campaign line aside over regions with those. Yeah, some of these books do need a vast improvement. And beyond the effects, and the fact that every time you start a campaign is randomized what books are going to give what effect, which creates a situation where you either have one campaign that's much better than another, or you're just starting a campaign over and over and over and over again until you get the books in the positions that you want them to be. This is, by the way, an issue for Manfred. This is an issue for Volkmar. If Creative Assembly were to improve the system, they would be improving not just the Tomb King campaigns, they'd be improving those 2 other campaigns as well. So you're looking at 6 campaigns being much better if the Books of Nagash system was better overall. But there's more to it than just that. See, the problem with the Books of Nagash is that you actually have to, if they're in a rogue army, whatever, not a problem. It is bullshit. Of course, some of these armies are pretty ridiculous, and some of them are very far away, so you might never get them in a campaign because, you know, distance involved. So maybe they should be closer, or maybe they should be attached to quest battles that you can teleport to do it. Fair enough. I'll take that. That's one of the things Malachi does with his adventures. But here's the problem. The big problem. You can only get the Books of Nagash if they're in a settlement by taking that settlement yourself. You may not care whatsoever about the settlement in question, but the only way to get that Book of Nagash is to go to war with the faction that has that settlement, take it over, and conquer it. This is a very outdated system, and we've seen how it can be better. If you consider Phoric, or if you consider the Chaos Dwarf system in Realms of Chaos, specifically, with the artifacts for both Phoric and Chaos Dwarves, they can take these settlements and get the artifacts that they're after, but they can also do military alliances with various factions in order to acquire them. So I think that would be a much better dynamic and situation. We can also talk about the fact that Tomb Kings can't confederate one another. Again, I think that makes sense from an Archon standpoint. It doesn't make sense from a Cetra standpoint. Or maybe vassalization should be something that you can do in order to achieve your campaign victory conditions. Like, but with a better system of vassal. I just think confederation would just be better. Like, if you're playing Cetra, you can confederate everyone except Archon. If you're playing Katep, right? If you're playing Khalida, well, you shouldn't be able to confederate Cetra because Cetra does not serve, but that's a different discussion. But I think confederation would be welcome. I think it could depend on the Legendary Lord we're talking about with regards to that. But yeah, the books need to be better, the victory conditions need to be better, diplomacy needs to be improved. Tomb Kings can be really powerful. But another thing to talk about is the fact that they have these free units over here at the top for buildings that only increase unit capacity by 1. And the thing is, here's the problem with this. 1 unit, specifically, Necrosphinxes are just flat out better than others. Or whatever, 1 unit is just better than others. Hierocians or Hierotitans, just flat out useless. I mean, they're not useless, they're just not worth investing in getting a building. Because limited building slots, limited capacity. You're just better getting Necrosphinxes or War Sphinxes in your campaign and never touching the Hierotitans, right? So yeah, the buildings could use an update in the way they work in a Tomb King campaign. Maybe we could have buildings that give more unit capacity. Like, maybe these Sphinxes and all that should be available at tier 4 and give you 1 unit capacity, and then at tier 5 you get 2 or 3 extra unit capacity, would certainly incentivize you to invest in those kind of buildings, as opposed to how things work at the moment. Personally, I just kind of ignore a lot of things and just get a lot of Ushapti with great bows because, you know, they're really good. Or I get artillery if I want to. Infantry just to fill up because you can get a good amount of infantry capacity, but that's roughly about it. But yeah, there's tons of problems with the way things are balanced for the Tomb Kings right now. And it's just a question of balance, really, for the most part. It's like building tiers, army capacity, hero capacity. Those things can be easily improved. And that's kind of one of the frustrating aspects with Tomb Kings. The issues that I've mentioned, it's not like it's a crazy thing to change for them. It's not like it's a complicated thing as well. Who knows with the spaghetti code of Warhammer 3. But these are the kind of things that I hope Creative Assembly improves on. So books, army capacity, hero capacity, research overhaul would be very welcome, don't get me wrong. Canopic jars, gaining Canopic jars. Like, even with Canopic jars, like, early on it's a painful experience, but then later on you just start getting a lot of people with this skill, and then you have more than you can spend on stuff. That, again, is not a great dynamic in a campaign, when you have those resources that you really struggle to get early on, but then later on you just have so many you don't give a crap about. That's not a good system for a campaign. Costine signing out, stay tuned for more.